Steel, aluminum, also the auto sector, of course, being hard hit by President Trump's.
The reality is the pressure is today, if General Motors volume is down 25%, if Nissan volumes are down 25%, and you're not getting those orders, you need working capital. And, the Prime Minister said, I'm going to focus on procurement from Canada. But if we've got solutions for other NATO partners, there's 29 countries that if we've got something, we can sell to the Danes, we can sell to the Germans, we can sell to the French. We are really looking at this as what's the opportunity to pivot and how hard can we go?
Canada just delivered one of its clearest messages yet. Donald Trump's unraveling auto sector will not drag this country down with it. As U.S. automakers stumble through production cuts, tariff chaos, and political uncertainty, Canada is taking a very different path, a deliberate pivot designed to protect our jobs, our supply chains, and our national independence. This is not just strategy. This is self-defense. The turning point came from a remarkably candid interview with Flavio Volpe on CTV News, the head of Canada's Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association and a key advisor to Prime Minister Mark Carney. Volpe did not sugarcoat the situation. He explained that the U.S. auto sector is weakening under Trump's second-term protectionist agenda, with major companies reporting significant declines in volume. General Motors is down by roughly a quarter. Nissan is down by a similar margin. When those numbers collapse, Canadian suppliers immediately feel the pain. Fewer orders, lower volumes, and rising pressure. But what stood out was not just the problem, it was the response. Volpe revealed that Canadian auto firms are already looking for opportunities to pivot, the same way they did during the pandemic when production lines were rapidly converted to manufacture ventilators, PPE, and essential medical devices. This time, the pivot is aimed at reducing dependence on a U.S. partner that has become unpredictable. Volpe also highlighted a major shift inside the federal government. He quoted Carney directly, "I'm going to focus on procurement from Canada." That sentence marks an unmistakable shift in industrial policy. Canada is no longer willing to rely on American-made equipment, especially when the U.S. government is weaponizing trade policy against its closest ally. The interview came at a moment when Trump's tariff regime has destabilized cross-border supply chains. Courts are preparing to hear challenges to his latest trade actions, and automakers are reconsidering investments across North America. In the middle of it all, Canada is reassessing its place in the continental auto ecosystem and charting a course with far more control. Donald Trump entered his second term promising to restore American manufacturing dominance. Instead, his policies are weakening the very industries he claimed to protect. Expanded Section 232 tariffs have raised cost for U.S. producers. Supply chains had become more fragile, not less. Export markets are shrinking because of retaliation. Investment decisions have stalled or been suspended. Reuters reporting throughout 2025 shows U.S. automakers delaying new EV lines, revising production targets, and warning shareholders about rising uncertainty. Politico went even further, calling one of Trump's tariff rounds a self-inflicted blow to Detroit. When you combine political volatility with financial strain, the U.S. auto sector becomes a risk, not a partner, for any country tied too closely to it. This is precisely why Volpe's message hits so hard. If Canada stays attached to a sinking system, we sink too, and Canada is not willing to do that.
Canada's pivot is not improvised. It is a coordinated industrial shift accelerated by the lessons of the pandemic. When supply chains broke, Canadian manufacturers proved they could transform overnight. That muscle memory is back. Auto suppliers are now exploring roles in defense technology, aerospace tooling, battery components, robotics, and high-precision engineering. Instead of waiting for U.S. orders that may never return, they are preparing to compete in markets where reliability and innovation matter more than political theatrics. This pivot is reinforced by federal policy. Carney's budget frameworks emphasize clean power infrastructure, domestic supply chain resilience, critical minerals, and advanced manufacturing. The message is that Canada will build the conditions for automakers to thrive here regardless of U.S. turmoil. Ottawa is also revising procurement rules, so taxpayer dollars support Canadian production instead of subsidizing an unstable American system. The end goal is unmistakable: a Canadian auto ecosystem strong enough to stand on its own, trade globally, and withstand whatever Washington throws our way.
One of the most powerful ideas in the interview is that Canada should stop purchasing American-made equipment when domestic capabilities exist. For decades, it felt natural to buy from the United States, but Trump's escalation of tariffs changed the equation. A partner who uses economic pressure as a political weapon cannot expect loyalty in procurement. Volpe made the point clearly. If Canada increases defense spending and industrial investment, we must ensure those dollars strengthen Canadian factories, not feed a U.S. system that has treated Canada as collateral damage in its trade battles. This is not anti-American sentiment. It is a pragmatic response to a new reality. Washington has become too unreliable, too impulsive, and too willing to use Canada as leverage. The safest long-term strategy is simple: build more at home.
Perhaps the most underreported part of the interview was Volpe's comment about NATO. He pointed out that Canadian manufacturers are preparing to compete for contracts across 29 NATO countries. In other words, Trump's protectionism has unintentionally opened the door for Canada to become a more important supplier to Europe. If allies see the United States as unstable, they will look for partners who can deliver consistency. Canada fits that role perfectly. We have regulatory stability, world-class engineering, abundant critical minerals, and a political climate that values international cooperation. If Canadian suppliers can pivot into high-value defense and industrial manufacturing, they could gain access to a market far larger than the U.S. auto sector ever offered. This is the deeper story. Canada is not shrinking its ambitions, we're expanding them.
The final point is blunt but necessary. Canada cannot stake its industrial future on an America that keeps shifting the rules. The traditional North American auto partnership was built on trust, predictability, and shared economic interests. Under Trump, those pillars no longer exist. If the U.S. auto industry continues to wobble under rising costs and volatile policy, Canada will be dragged into every downturn. Remaining dependent would mean accepting that our suppliers, workers, and communities live at the mercy of decisions made in Washington. That is not a sustainable model for a country with Canada's capabilities. The pivot is not optional, it is survival.
Canada is no longer trying to convince the United States to stabilize. We are preparing for the possibility that it won't. Trump's erratic trade agenda has weakened America's auto industry and exposed the risks of overdependence. Instead of waiting for the next tariff threat or supply chain shock, Canada is charting a new course, one that emphasizes domestic production, global diversification, NATO partnerships, and strategic independence. The United States may be entering a turbulent decade in manufacturing. Canada refuses to be dragged into that turbulence. The pivot has already begun. The only question now is how far Canada is prepared to go and how quickly we intend to finish the job.
I'll tell you what I would do. I'd never apologize to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's trying to destroy our province, destroy our country, steal manufacturing jobs and auto sector jobs, steel jobs, aluminum jobs. The list keeps going on. I'll never apologize to President Trump.
In a week already charged with tariff tension and political theater, Ontario Premier Doug Ford delivered a statement that cut straight through the noise. "I'll never apologize to Donald Trump," he told reporters. "They could put me on a stretching rack. I wouldn't do it." Those words landed like a thunderclap. Ford wasn't just rejecting Trump's demand for contrition over Ontario's controversial anti-tariff ad. He was drawing a line in the sand for all of Canada. His tone was defiant, his message unmistakable. Canada would not bow, not even under direct pressure from the White House.
The drama began with an unexpected media offensive. Ontario's government had purchased airtime across American networks for a provocative commercial that used archival audio of Ronald Reagan denouncing tariffs. The symbolism was obvious. Reagan, the conservative hero of free trade, seemingly calling out Trump's own protectionist crusade. The ad hit hard. Within days, it generated over 12 billion impressions worldwide, trended on U.S. cable talk shows, and was even quoted on the floor of the U.S. Senate. But at the same time, it infuriated President Trump, who viewed the campaign as a personal affront. In response, Trump, already fuming over Canada's resistance to his Liberation Day tariffs, suspended trade talks with Ottawa. Washington insiders called it one of the most severe diplomatic breakdowns of the Trump-Carney era. Back in Toronto, reporters pressed Ford for details. He confirmed that Trump himself had called repeatedly, demanding that the ad be pulled. Ford refused at first. He said, "We waited 3 days because it was working." Eventually, the ad was paused, but Ford emphasized that the campaign had already done its job, reminding Americans that tariffs on Canada were effectively taxes on American consumers. At the same time, Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had been traveling in Asia, quietly moved to calm the situation. According to Ottawa insiders, Carney's team offered an apology to Washington in hopes of restarting negotiations. Ford made clear that such diplomacy wasn't his style. He said bluntly, "I'll never apologize to President Trump. He's trying to destroy our province, our country, steal aluminum and auto jobs. You show weakness, he'll smell it like a pit bull."
Beneath the sound bites lies a complex political fault line, one that runs through the heart of Canada's trade strategy in the Trump era. Mark Carney's federal government is pursuing what officials call a strategic discipline approach. Rebuild trust with the U.S. administration, avoid public escalation, and prepare for the 2026 USMCA review that could reshape North American trade for a generation. The goal is long-term stability, not short-term confrontation. Doug Fort's approach could not be more different. He speaks the language of political populism, blunt, emotional, and rooted in the frustrations of working-class Ontarians who see factories closing and supply chains collapsing. For Ford, Trump's tariffs are not abstract policy. They are a direct attack on people who build cars, pour steel, and keep Ontario's industrial heart beating. Tariffs don't work anywhere in the world, Ford insisted. They especially don't work with your number one customer. His argument resonated with business leaders across southern Ontario who have watched billions in investment shift south since the White House began reshoring production. The Premier's hard-nosed stance also carries political calculation. By publicly defying Trump, Ford positions himself as a protector of Canadian sovereignty, a rare moment when a provincial leader steps into the national arena and wins applause. Polls taken after the controversy showed a surge of support for Ford among manufacturing belt voters who feel abandoned by Ottawa's measured tone. Yet Ford's defiance also risked fracturing Canada's trade front. Carney's team, wary of mixed signals, reminded premiers that international negotiations fall under federal jurisdiction. It is the responsibility of the Government of Canada to conduct these talks, the Prime Minister emphasized, subtly rebuking Ford's independent foray. Over the following days, Ford softened, slightly. "He's the Prime Minister, I'm the Premier," he said later. "When it comes to national issues like making a deal with the U.S., that falls on his lap. I'm there to support him." The pivot reflected both pragmatism and political pressure. With trade talks on ice and markets nervous, unity was the only viable message. Even so, Ontario hasn't fully retreated. Ford continues to enforce his province's ban on U.S. alcohol sales in government-run stores, the lone retaliatory policy still in effect. He said, "Anything could be an irritant, but we have to stand firm." The measure is mostly symbolic, but it captures a wider truth. Canada's patience with Washington's tariff games is wearing thin.
The Ford-Carney split is emblematic of a broader transformation inside Canada. For decades, the country prided itself on quiet diplomacy, a steady, understated counterpart to America's louder politics. But under Trump's second term, that balance has changed. The U.S. now treats trade as a weapon, not a partnership. Tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber are bargaining chips. Canadian leaders must decide whether to respond with calm negotiation or visible pushback. Ford's refusal to apologize and his description of Trump as a pit bull who smells weakness captures the mood of a country tired of being the polite neighbor. Across Canada, editorial pages called it the first honest answer to Trump's bullying. Meanwhile, Ottawa faces a tightrope. Every escalation risks jeopardizing billions in cross-border trade, yet every concession risks political backlash at home. The federal government is trying to avoid another collapse of talks before the 2026 USMCA review, where Washington is expected to demand stricter rules of origin and new auto content quotas.
Doug Ford's vow never to apologize may have begun as a fiery soundbite, but it has evolved into something far larger, a symbol of Canadian resistance in a new era of economic confrontation. For decades, Canada's political culture valued restraint, careful phrasing, polite negotiation, and compromise. Now, in the face of relentless tariffs and shifting alliances, that old playbook is being rewritten. Ford's defiance, Carney's diplomacy, together they illustrate a country testing the boundaries of its independence. As the countdown to the 2026 USMCA review begins, the question for Canadians is no longer whether to push back, but how. Will Canada continue playing the patient partner, or will it adopt Ford's bolder tone, one that meets Trump's aggression head-on? Because in the end, the stakes go far beyond one commercial or one apology. They go to the heart of Canada's economic sovereignty. And as Ford put it, with unmistakable conviction,
If anything, you roll over with President Trump. We've seen what President Trump does. He smells weakness, he'll latch on you like a pit bull. And we should never, ever show weakness with President Trump. And we'll never stop fighting for Ontario and Canadian jobs.
Millions of people across the U.S. and cities around the world took part in a new round of No Kings protests this weekend. The mass movement, spanning more than 2,500 demonstrations, drew massive crowds. Demonstrators are calling for an end to what they describe as authoritarian rule, accusing President Donald Trump of abusing his power.
Across the United States, millions of protesters have filled the streets chanting a single phrase: no thrones, no crowns, no kings. The No Kings movement has become the loudest cry of defiance against President Donald Trump's second-term agenda. What began as a small rally in June has evolved into more than 2,500 coordinated demonstrations across major cities and capitals around the world. Their message is simple: America will not bow to authoritarian rule. But this unrest isn't only about politics. It's about a country under strain, an economy weighed down by tariffs, inflation, and a government that's been shut for weeks. Behind the roar of the protests lies a growing realization that Trump's America First experiment is beginning to unravel from within. And just across the northern border, Canada is rewriting the rules of the very trade war Trump started. While he tries to tighten his grip, Ottawa is quietly turning restraint into leverage and exposing how his grand economic gamble may be collapsing under its own weight.
The protests didn't emerge from nowhere. They are the product of a country stretched thin. The U.S. is entering its fourth government shutdown in less than 6 years as Congress battles over healthcare cuts and immigration policy. Federal workers are furloughed, agencies paralyzed, and ordinary families left uncertain about paychecks. Meanwhile, the economy that Trump once called unbeatable is losing its shine. The International Monetary Fund estimates U.S. growth at roughly 2% in 2025, but that modest figure hides deeper problems. The national deficit has ballooned to 6.5% of GDP, and investors are fleeing the dollar. This month, gold hit a record $4,300 per ounce, a signal that markets no longer see U.S. debt as a safe bet. Political anger and economic anxiety now feed one another. Trump's critics say his obsession with power, controlling the Fed, silencing the press, weaponizing tariffs, has turned America's greatest asset, its stability, into a source of risk. The No Kings rallies have become a mirror of that unease, a society demanding accountability from a government that increasingly rules by decree. Even among conservatives, quiet concern is growing. Business associations that once celebrated Trump's protectionism now warn that the wave of tariffs is driving up prices and choking trade. Farmers are frustrated by collapsing export markets. And while Trump projects confidence, the mood on Wall Street has shifted from optimism to caution, a sign that his once solid economic foundation is beginning to crack. In Canada, the trade war has produced its own headlines. The Stellantis Jeep Compass shift from Brampton, Ontario to Illinois erased nearly 3,000 Canadian jobs and created 5,000 positions in the U.S., a symbolic victory for Trump's reshoring campaign. Yet behind the scenes, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has chosen an unconventional path. Instead of retaliating with new tariffs, Ottawa dropped dozens of counter-duties on U.S. and even Chinese goods. A 100-page order quietly removed levies on steel, aluminum, and other industrial products, decisions that angered domestic producers but signaled a clear shift from confrontation to negotiation. Carney's team argues that in this climate, escalation would be self-destructive. Canada's approach, officials say, is to stabilize markets and preserve access to Washington's supply chains while preparing for deeper reforms in 2026 when the USMCA faces review. In public, Carney framed it simply: there's a time to hit back and a time to talk. Behind those words lies a strategy to turn patience into power. While Trump raises tariffs to pressure Canada, Ottawa is positioning itself as the steady hand in a volatile region, a contrast to the chaos in Washington. This quieter strategy is earning attention abroad. European and Asian trade officials see Canada as a model for small economies facing U.S. pressure. Instead of confrontation, it's using predictability as a diplomatic weapon, keeping global investors calm while the U.S. faces domestic unrest. For Carney, this could be the most significant foreign policy test of his tenure. To Trump's former trade advisors, like Kellyanne Shaw, the coming deal will be a better arrangement, yet that phrase now carries a different meaning. Instead of cementing U.S. dominance, it hints at a compromise shaped by Canada's endurance. The logic is simple. Trump's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and trucks were meant to bring manufacturing home, but those same tariffs disrupted U.S. automakers, inflated input costs, and forced new dependence on Canadian and Mexican supply lines. Stellantis may have moved production, yet its Illinois plant still relies on Canadian steel and aluminum, materials now flowing tariff-free after Ottawa's recalibration. Trump's White House wanted Canada to bend. Instead, it built an opening for structured cooperation. The United States is learning that it cannot isolate itself without raising prices on its own consumers. As talks continue in Washington, Canadian officials quietly report progress in 3 sectors: energy, aluminum, and automotive, areas where both sides seek stability before the USMCA 2026 review. The irony is striking. The very tariffs designed to weaken Canada have forced the U.S. to negotiate terms that look more balanced than before. The result is a North American economy slowly realigning itself, not around Washington, but around interdependence. U.S. factories still need Canadian metals, Canadian energy still powers American cities, and cross-border supply chains remain inseparable. Trump's attempt to dominate has instead proved how integrated both nations truly are. As darkness falls on another day of protests, chants of "No Kings" echo through American streets. They capture more than political anger. They express a collective rejection of one-man rule, whether in government or in trade. Across the border, Canada's quiet defiance tells a parallel story. While Trump builds walls of tariffs, Ottawa is proving that restraint can be a weapon of its own. Carney's government is not winning through confrontation, but through calculation, turning Trump's unpredictability into an opportunity for structural reform. The stakes stretch far beyond North America. Global markets are watching whether Democratic allies can withstand the weight of Trump's protectionism without fracturing. Canada's gamble to wait, negotiate, and outlast may yet redefine how smaller nations manage power in a world led by giants. The United States faces discontent at home and diminishing control abroad. The man who once promised to make America untouchable now finds his strongest challenges not from foreign rivals, but from within and just next door. The No Kings movement may have started as a protest, but its spirit extends far beyond Washington. It's a reminder that in every system built on power, eventually, the subjects stop bowing.
There's nothing I see that would suggest that we would have a mixed fleet in submarines. Both of these are the Korean option and the German-Norwegian option, if I can put it that way. Both of them fulfill the requirements, the very high requirements for the Canadian Navy.
In New York, Prime Minister Mark Carney addressed reporters with a statement that landed far beyond the immediate topic of defense procurement. He confirmed that Canada would not split its submarine contract. Instead, the choice has been narrowed to two options only, a German-Norwegian design and a South Korean design. Both meet the Navy's high standards. Both fulfill Canada's operational needs. And crucially, there will be no American option on the table. What reads as a technical matter about fleet composition, but it is more than that. Carney explained that efficiencies come from having one type of submarine. Shared spare parts, a common pool of expertise, and predictable maintenance cycles mean fewer costs over decades of service. What reads as a decision about logistics is also a marker of independence. In the context of strained relations with Washington, the absence of a U.S. bid tells its own story. It shows that tariffs meant to force compliance are instead encouraging a close ally to look elsewhere. The contract in question is not small. Analysts estimate a value of around 20 to 24 billion Canadian dollars for roughly 12 conventional submarines. Ottawa has written new rules for projects of this size. Defense contracts must now bring clear benefits at home. That means Canadian jobs, industrial partnerships, and long-term technological capacity. The bidders have shaped their pitches accordingly. Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems has offered the Type 212CD, a design already ordered by Germany and Norway. Its advantage lies in NATO interoperability and a proven track record. The risk is timing, because Canada would be at the back of the queue. South Korea's Hanwha Oceans has offered the KSS-3, a larger platform with lithium-ion batteries. Its promise is speed. If awarded next year, the first vessel could arrive by 2032, with 4 delivered by 2035. Seoul has also sweetened the bid with potential co-investments in Canadian industries, from battery production to liquefied natural gas and even aerospace. The message is clear. Canada is demanding economic spillovers, and suppliers are responding with packages that go well beyond submarines. To understand why this matters, we have to recall the broader context. Since April 2025, the United States has imposed tariffs ranging from 10 to 50% on a wide array of imports. The White House framed this as a fair policy, but allies have pushed back. Canada, facing duties on metals, autos, and farm exports, has chosen a different route. Instead of chasing exemptions, Ottawa has turned procurement into an instrument of industrial strategy. It has signed on to a European Union initiative worth $1.3 trillion, and it has written domestic procurement rules that favor Canadian firms first. This creates a feedback loop. Tariffs designed to pull allies closer have the opposite effect. Rather than deepening dependence on U.S. supply chains, they accelerate diversification. A defense program that once would have gone automatically to an American contractor is now a competition where Europe and Asia are the only players. Washington loses not only potential revenue, but also the influence that comes with maintenance contracts, training programs, and shared technology standards. The choice is not without risks. Germany offers integration with NATO fleets, but delivery slots are crowded. South Korea offers faster timelines, but its newest model has yet to be exported. Both designs claim the ability to operate submerged for more than 3 weeks, a crucial requirement for Arctic patrols. Both rely on advanced battery technology rather than traditional systems. What comes next will matter for more than defense. A final contract will decide not only which submarines Canada sails, but also which supply chains its economy will be tied to for decades. Washington will have to absorb the signal.
Tariffs intended to increase leverage have produced a visible backfire. Canada is rerouting billions toward partners in Europe and Asia, and in doing so, shifting the balance of industrial and strategic ties.
Well, ahead of renegotiating the existing North American Free Trade Agreement, Canada and Mexico have signed a pact aimed at deepening economic ties.
We will scale up our engagement in foreign affairs, in trade and investment, in agriculture, natural resources, in energy, finance, health, the environment, and public safety and security.
When President Trump announced his program of reciprocal tariffs in 2025, the goal was clear. Ottawa was supposed to bend under the weight of higher duties on steel, aluminum, and even copper. The United States believed Canada would be left isolated, with no choice but to make concessions. Yet, something different has unfolded. Instead of isolation, Canada has been pushed to seek allies, and the most visible outcome came during Prime Minister Mark Carney's whirlwind 36-hour trip to Mexico City. There, Canada and Mexico signed a strategic partnership agreement. The trip was short, but the message was long-lasting. Trump's attempt to corner Canada is instead motivating new continental bonds.
Billed as a comprehensive strategic partnership, it includes a plan to build infrastructure like ports, rail, and energy corridors. They'll also work closer on tackling organized crime and protecting the environment.
Mexico now looks more important to Canada than it has in decades. Under President Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico is pursuing domestic reforms and seeking partners beyond Washington. That opens a door for Ottawa. Agriculture is a prime example. Canadian canola producers have struggled with tariffs and a loss of Chinese demand. Mexico's growing biofuel sector gives them a chance to regain markets. The deal also touches energy and infrastructure, with both governments pledging cooperation on ports, rail lines, and energy corridors. For Canada, this means a way to move resources more efficiently, something that has long been a weakness in trade negotiations. For Mexico, it means more investment and reliable access to Canadian goods. Analysts also point out that this partnership signals a wider shift in North America, where smaller nations are forced to adapt quickly or risk falling behind in Trump's high-pressure trade environment. What Trump once used as a wedge to split Ottawa and Mexico City has now created common ground.
At the heart of this renewed alliance lies a shared concern. Both governments know that Trump views the North American Trade Pact with suspicion. As the review of SUSMA approaches in 2026, the risk of dismantling the deal is real. Canada has already launched public consultations with businesses, open from September 20 to November 3, 2025, to gather feedback on vulnerabilities and priorities. Mexico began a similar process on September 17. The timing is deliberate. Both countries are preparing for unpredictable negotiations, and the fear is that Washington could use tariffs as leverage again. Trump's record shows he is willing to threaten withdrawal or impose new barriers if it suits his domestic agenda. That is why Carney and Sheinbaum framed their new pact as complementary to CUSMA, careful not to present it as a bloc against the United States. The words are diplomatic, but the intent is clear. Both Canada and Mexico want insurance in case the United States turns its back on the agreement. Carney's government understands that leverage in 2026 will not come from speeches but from results. For years, Canada has struggled to move its oil, gas, and minerals to market, weakening its hand. Building a working partnership with Mexico addresses that gap. It creates a sense that Canada can stand on more than one leg in the North American economy. For Trump, this is the irony. The very tariffs meant to weaken Ottawa are strengthening its resolve and broadening its partnerships. Canada and Mexico are now positioning themselves to present a more united and prepared front when negotiations open next year. Instead of breaking Canada's confidence, U.S. policy has forced Ottawa to act with urgency and build alliances that had been neglected since the early days of NAFTA. The story today is not of a country retreating under pressure, but of one seeking new ground. What was intended as economic punishment is reshaping the trade map of North America. Canada and Mexico stand side by side, and the result shows that Trump's tariffs have backfired in ways Washington never anticipated.